So Dino Crisis is a thing. And what's a Dino Crisis, you ask? Well, imagine if you took Resident Evil and crammed in as much Jurassic Park as you could, forcing out all the zombies, but keeping the excellent gameplay, plot, and horror elements. And then you pretty much have Dino Crisis. That's right, I'm doing video games now too. Branching out! The game was so popular that a well-made sequel continued the plot, while improving on a lot of the game mechanics. It still surprises me to this day how many people have not heard of this franchise, especially with how pervasive the love of dinosaurs is, and with the recent revival of the Jurassic Park series. My brother and I would play these games for hours when we were younger. They were hard, fast-paced, heart-pounding fun, which was a great contrast to the other adventure-based and platformer games we were also playing at the time. My brother especially poured all of his time into this game, on both the original PlayStation and all the reissues since. But now we live in a golden age of remaking games, especially games from this PS1 era. These two games are amazing, but like many games from the early days of 3D graphics, they have not aged particularly well. And with only reissues and ports, it has become increasingly harder to introduce or show people why the Dino Crisis series is amazing. And so today, I want to talk about Dino Crisis. The comparison to Resident Evil was one that I made intentionally. Many critics dubbed the first game Resident Evil but with dinosaurs, and deservedly so, as the game was developed by the same team who made Resident Evil. Led by Resident Evil mastermind himself, Shinji Mikami, the team was interested in making a game using dinosaurs because it's fucking dinosaurs! Dino Crisis was released in 1999 as a kind of spiritual cousin or side sequel to the Resident Evil series, although it takes place in a separate universe. The team wanted to focus on something more realistic than the fantasy origins that had led them to zombies. Extrapolating on the science fiction ideas of bioterrorism that are explored in Resident Evil, eventually the team was led to look at other sources of horror and sci-fi, such as Jurassic Park, The Lost World, and Alien. The first two are an obvious influence on the game, although the plot strays heavily from the biomedical field of science in order to distinguish itself from Resident Evil. But their fascination with dinosaurs led the team to think about the speed, the size, the terror, and the violence that these ancient creatures were capable of. This in turn led them to look at the xenomorphs from Alien. Of course, because dinosaurs are prehistoric, the team was forced to look at real-world alive animals to see how wild carnivores act. How wild dogs and wolves hunt in packs, and how alligators have evolved as these ancient-looking apex predators that have deceptively slow movement before they snap and kill in an instant. I'm surprised they didn't look at birds because, well, birds are dinosaurs. Have you ever seen a cassowary? Or descriptions of the giant moa? Those are some dinosaur-looking motherfuckers. Dino Crisis was released a few months before Resident Evil 3, and although comparisons were made, the game managed to distinguish itself. The game was still set in a lot of indoor locations to maintain that claustrophobic sensibility. The controls and static camera angles were also kept, but the game world felt more like an adventure through a prehistoric land filled with terror and deadly discoveries. Although some areas connected back, there was a real sense of forward progression. The environments were all created using a 3D engine rather than rendering, which was pretty advanced for the time, but the standout difference in gameplay was the dinosaurs themselves. Although Mikami was disappointed that the dinosaurs did not have complex AI, he was still impressed with the team's ability to create fearsome and frightening encounters. True to their inspirations, the developers made the dinosaurs agile and aggressive, leading to a violent and visceral experience that made combat scary, but in a very different way to the shambling, slow-paced, inevitable creep of the rotting corpses seen in Resident Evil. Instead, any area in the jungle or room in a lab could have 2 or 3 raptors jump out of the background and hop around. This caused the marketing team to dub the game panic horror rather than survival horror. The game was successful in both popularity and sales, particularly in Japan, where it was the best-selling game for the week it came out. Its popularity prompted the production of a sequel, and in 2000, Dino Crisis 2 was released. To be honest, I remember this one a lot more than the first one, and that might be why I prefer it. This game saw the introduction of a second playable character who had a noticeable difference in gameplay, both in how many hits he could take and which weapons he had at his disposal. The two characters' stories overlapped throughout the game, which helped tell the story more effectively. More importantly were the stars of the games, the dinosaurs. The sequel saw a larger variety of dinosaur types with some underwater areas that introduced mosasaurs, and even a Tyrannosaurus Rex that terrorizes both characters throughout the whole game. I mean, you did shoot his eye out with a rocket launcher. I'm just saying, I'd be pretty pissed if someone did that to me. But it was awesome, and so, in 2003, Dino Crisis 3 was released, and I'll come back to that one. It's bad. It's really bad. Despite the developers attempting to go for a more realistic storyline, I actually think the plot of Dino Crisis as a whole is a little sillier than Resident Evil, at least for the main plot conceit. Time travel causes dinosaurs to be around. It's not that simple, but essentially some scientists on an island were messing around with something called third energy, might as well be called MacGuffin energy, and accidentally did a time travel, and now dinosaurs are all over the place. So a team of people called SORT, S-O-R-T, or Secret Operation Raid Team, do some secret operations to raid the place. You play as Regina, a badass redhead who does the soldier thing and is generally the coolest person ever. So you do the thing and save the day, and everyone says, let's never mess around with third energy again. And so a couple years later, they start messing around with third energy again. And Regina gets called back in, and they're all like, hey, you want to do a sequel? So she gets sent in on a brand new team with some guy named Dylan on it. And Dylan's all, wait, dinosaurs are a thing? This is crazy. And Regina is all, play the first game and keep up. So you do the thing and save the day again, but this time with an awesome satellite cannon beam down from space to destroy a Gigantosaurus. That is the actual scientific name of the dinosaur, by the way. And then Dylan and this girl you found were all, peace out, you go on ahead. And so you use the third energy and jump through this gate to do some wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff, and then the game ends. So then on Dino Crisis 3, you're in a spaceship in the future with a bunch of mutant aliens that look like dinosaurs, but are definitely not dinosaurs, and there are no characters or plot connections, and everyone hated it because it was super bad. How am I even supposed to pretend to be good at shooting not dinosaurs when I don't have Regina around? There was also a light gun first-person shooter called Dino Stalker, but it was more of a spin-off than actually part of the series. So after the failure of the third game, both critically and economically, Dino Crisis has kind of stagnated as an IP. Because Dino Crisis was made by the same team as Resident Evil, that means the IP is owned by Capcom, and of course, Capcom has been killing it with the remakes lately. The remake of Resident Evil 2 in particular was amazing. It took the original storyline, now with outstanding graphics, and incorporated the gameplay from the genre-defining Resident Evil 4, except better given the 15 years since that game came out. The result was a game that was still scary, but in a very different way. The enhanced graphics add to the physical horror and grotesque nature of the zombies. Static camera angles were scrapped for the over-the-shoulder third-person dynamic camera, and the tank controls were replaced with a stop-to-aim and shoot system that actually lets you move while shooting. But the zombies are resilient to compensate. The design changes to the gameplay were agonized over to ensure the game felt scary. This is, after all, survival horror, and holy shit does it feel like it. We are living in the golden age of remakes right now. The aforementioned Resident Evil 2 was followed up by a remake of Resident Evil 3, the Spyro the Dragon trilogy was given a spit shine and updated graphics, the Crash Bandicoot series was also reworked along with Crash Team Racing, Nintendo has made HD remakes of The Legend of Zelda's Wind Waker and Twilight Princess recently, and before that they rebuilt Ocarina of Time from the ground up for the DS and followed it up with a Majora's Mask remake. People keep talking about these new reboots of Tomb Raider, but I've never heard of Tomb Raider before. After years and years of fans whining about it, we finally got a remake of the beloved Final Fantasy VII earlier this year, and it's apparently coming out in sections. This year's release was only one of what could be 3 to 5, depending on how badly Square Enix wants to milk it. So why isn't there a Dino Crisis remake? This year, a brand new Crash Bandicoot game was announced. The last real Crash Bandicoot game to come out was in 2010, and the last one that anyone cared about was 2004. But in 2017, a remake of the first 3 games was released, and a few years later, the remake of the fan favorite Crash Team Racing, as I mentioned earlier. The remake was a way to show the fans that these games could work in the modern era of video games, and hopefully reboot the franchise. I was not surprised at all to see a brand new Crash game. I'm not gonna play it, but then I never saw the appeal of the originals. The problem is that the video game industry always wants to play it safe, never doing anything new or risky, because how else are we going to make all the money? For an industry that is so hellbent on having games be considered art, they don't do anything to help themselves innovate in regards to meet that goal. We all know that graphics are better now, but that doesn't make a game good, it just makes the game prettier. Look at the indie games that have come out. None of them are particularly astounding in terms of graphics, but the gameplay and story are so innovative. I said something in the last episode of This Is a Thing in regards to how movies get sequels, but I think it applies to remakes as well.
The idea is that if it makes money, then another one will make more money.
But I think this misses the point of a remake. How many times have you found a game that was not critically acclaimed or didn't sell a butt-zillion copies, but you loved it anyway? I'm sure everyone has at least one game that was their absolute favorite as a child, and you were able to look past its flaws to see a game that was fun and engaging, and you poured hours into it. Go ahead and name that game right now, or look it up if you can't remember what it's called. I'll wait. How disappointed were you when the game you loved was left to the wayside so the industry could make another Call of Duty game or completely ruin a franchise because they thought a horror game should have more action in it? I'm looking at you, EA. You ruined Dead Space! For me, that game was Jade Cocoon. Oh, hey, they did make a sequel. Either way, my point remains. One of the reasons that Nate and I started Cinemasters was because I was always so angry or disappointed when I saw a movie that had great ideas that were poorly executed, or not fleshed out because of budget limitations or studio interference or constant rewriting. Seriously, Hollywood, stop doing that. Sure, remaking a video game like Final Fantasy VII is guaranteed to make money, and that game's characters and plot will definitely benefit from the facelift. But there was no question about whether the game was popular or if it would make a comeback. Recreating the horror from Resident Evil and updating it with modern aesthetics for modern taste worked well, but both of those games were already amazing back in their day. What if someone remade Eternal Darkness in the way that Resident Evil has been? That would be terrifying. What do you mean you've never heard of Eternal Darkness? Okay, maybe you have heard of Eternal Darkness, but if you haven't, that just basically proves my point. My point is that remaking a game with the intention of rebooting a franchise that was already successful is fine, but remaking a game that had potential and just wasn't popular or wasn't commercially successful could reintroduce and reinvigorate an IP, or could help us rediscover and update forgotten mechanics that would have far more impact on gaming as an art form. We can't keep relying on things that we already know sell. It just causes a stagnation. Dino Crisis wasn't even unpopular or unsuccessful, and with what graphics and technology are capable of today, a remake could revive Shinji Mikami's dream of creating dinosaurs with comprehensive AI. Clever girl. Or the implementation of systemic dinosaur biomes in which different dinosaurs interact and prey upon or fight one another as Regina moves through the environment. And yes, you would play as Regina, I will accept no other. And this is me just spitballing ideas. I'm not a video game designer. I don't know how to Minecraft. So now you know about Dino Crisis and how cool this dinosaur-centric game was, and I'm hoping the little kid in you is just as excited as I was by this. Dino Crisis 1 and 2 should get a remake, and not just so I can see dinosaurs in awesome up-to-date 3D graphics, although I do definitely want that, but also to reinvigorate interest in the games and introduce it to new players so we can get an actual third game that isn't terrible. Here are a few reasons for why I like Dino Crisis and why it definitely needs a remake. All the cool weapons you get at a little bit at a time. In the second game, you can get a harpoon gun. That's awesome. Oh, or the anti-tank rifle. But of course, the tanks that you were anti-ing are dinosaurs. The back and forth story of Regina and Dylan is awesome. In classic Capcom fashion, there were these challenge modes after you beat the game, and I'm not just talking about updated difficulty. The story was pretty good, and I really want to know what happened to Dylan and Paula at the end with all the time traveling. Motherfucking dinosaurs are in this game. I could use that as my whole justification for 2 remakes and 7 sequels. But with the ongoing success of the Resident Evil remakes, I will continue to hope for a remake of Dino Crisis. Oh, come on! Hey, thanks for watching that video. If you've got a game from your childhood that you think deserves a remake or a reboot, throw it down in the comments, because I want to hear about it. A lot of the gameplay footage that I used in this video from Dino Crisis 1 was actually from my brother and his channel, which you can check out at One More Dissident right here on YouTube. And while you're here, you can give us a like and subscribe for more awesome content like This Is a Thing or a weekly podcast called Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.